Greetings, the damned. Welcome to Pod Damn America, the goth socialist podcast for werewolves that are in unions and shit. That was the sound of the Salt Bay chopping up steaks for Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela. I feel like this story got lost in the last 24-hour news cycle because, as we all know now, the president has he has the worst character in Mario Kart for penis. I feel like I don't really subscribe to this conspiracy theory that he does stuff like this to distract us, or that they manipulate the news because he's up to something really devious and insidious, while we're all talking about his toad penis. But I gotta be honest with you, I'm a little bit, I think that might, it's too good. It's like too good of a fucking story. It sucks. You can't even make jokes about it, really, because, like, what else? How are you funnier than the story itself? You know? President's dick looks like the mushroom character from Mario Kart. That's how she said it in the interview. She's like a mom. She doesn't even know who Toad is. Hilarious. But more to the point, that story came out like last night as I'm recording this, or rather last night, maybe this morning. But right before that, a story slipped through the cracks that's very relevant to our podcast today, which is that the Salt Bay guy, the ponytail chef guy who sprinkles salt down his elbow, went viral last year or year before that or whatever. In the middle of the night, he just decided to tweet out some videos of himself serving steaks to Nicolas Maduro and doing like Salt Bay stuff, doing like the weird sexy knife cutting of the steak and the salt and everything's in a little bowl of salt. He's he's like a Chewbacca mom type at this point, was really, really trying to cash in on it, which I don't blame you. Did the same thing, guys. Remember that? Yeah. Who gives a fuck? There's no money. We have to just grab as much of this fucking money as we can. So he tweets out these weird videos. It's in the middle of the night. I don't know if it's like a time zone thing or what. I was kind of drunk last night. I just see him. Oh my God. This is so weird, He's doing Salt Bay shit for Maduro. Maduro's smoking a cigar. He's wearing a bib that has Salt Bay on it with the glasses and everything. They hug. Okay, it's hard to really tell what exactly is going on or what the context is. I mean, this guy's just whatever. He's just on a tour of the world, trying to promote his bullshit based on his viral meme. There's also another video where he's just rifling through Maduro's like stash of cigars. It's pretty cool. But then, guess what? You know who else is up drunk using Twitter? Marco Rubio. So Marco Rubio last night, he saw Salt Bay because, of course, he follows Salt Bay and is like, desperately trying to be cool to maintain his image. Rubio's always talking about like rap beef. He doesn't understand shit. So he sees Salt Bay and he gets real mad. And he doxed Salt Bay. Marco Rubio tweeted out the address and phone number of Salt Bay's restaurant in Miami, presumably for people to harass Salt Bay over, fraternizing with the the supposed dictator of Venezuela, the elected president Nicolas Maduro. Which is weird because I feel like these people always end up just making their enemies look cooler. He's probably driving some business to this restaurant. It's called Nusret or something. Although the doxing the phone number is kind of weird. I don't know. I feel like all that stuff's available online. Anyway, it's fucking weird. But I don't really know how it ended because Salt Bae then, in response, I guess he maybe realized that, you know, a government official was harassing him. So he took the videos down. And now if you go to his Twitter page, there's just like a video or just a picture of him with like 13 children, and it just says my family. There's no adults. It's just a bunch of children. I don't know what the fuck's going on. I don't know Salt Bae's life, you know? But also, if you go back to before, you know, the last things he tweeted right before this trip to Venezuela, there's just a picture of him in black and white that just says Black Salt Bae. I don't know. I don't know, man. But yeah, look up those videos. Somebody, you know, ripped him. He took him down off of his Twitter, but like there's, you know, scathing New York Post captures of them and shit. Pretty weird. So yeah, that's that oddly on point for what we're going to talk about today. I have a journalist who I met when I was out doing shows, who I've been talking to a little bit about, just sort of like giving us a little basic 101 on Venezuela, since it's like it's a topic that no one seems to understand, which is, you know, kind of the point of this show. I started doing the show when I was like after Charlottesville, all the New York Times, you know, pieces and Washington Post pieces, all these pieces came out of describing Antifa as this you know, terrifying super soldier organization. I noticed, oh, they're getting this wrong. Okay, there's a pretty low bar here. I can get it better than the media is getting it, right? So that's kind of, I think, what the aim here is with Venezuela. All of the media that's coming out about Venezuela is so fucking bad. We're going to take a crack at just sort of demystifying it a little bit. Everyone gets it wrong. Even our pal John Oliver did a pretty weird job with it. Okay, so anyways, without further ado, the president's penis is the mushroom guy from Mario Kart. All right.
Them into positions of hopelessness and helplessness. The government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America. No, 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 not God Bless America. God damn America. That's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating us citizens as less than human. God damn America as long as she tries to act like she is God and she is supreme.
And we're back. Rogov had to take off to you know, fulfill his alibi, or whatever. For doing 9/11. Rogov did 9/11. I'm trying to get the government called on all my friends. It feels lonely being
That's good.
Initiation. Yeah.
Anyways, me and Anders are here speaking with Adalberto Antonio Toledo, a journalist who I believe I met in Chicago when I was out doing shows. You came to the house show, right?
Yeah, I did. I was there for a little bit. I actually had to step out, but I managed to get a little high in before I left. So
nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So basically, you know, thanks for coming to the show, or thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, it's good to be a part of the damned. You know.
Yeah.
Apparently, we're being called now. I don't really know how the whole situation is. Maybe we should have like a constituent assembly sort of situation, like Venezuela did, to where we can all figure out what exactly we want to do. But just one party, though, and none of that sort of business. All right. Full tanky communism all the time.
That is one hell of a segue. But segue perfectly relevant and valid because we're here to talk about, or you're here to talk about Venezuela with us, which I'm excited about because, as a leftist, I mean, part of the reason I'm making this show is like political ed. And I'm also, a student of all this stuff. And I think it's probably a good idea to get to the bottom of Venezuela because Venezuela is a lot of the right wing's like favorite talking point, just to dismiss socialism in general.
It's the sort of thing that they use as like a scapegoat for, somehow Venezuelan Venezuelan socialism, is exactly the way that it always has been. And it's exactly like Cuba and it's exactly like the USSR and all these nonsense ideas that these people have, but it's not exclusive to Americans. I will say that.
Sure. Yeah. And it's being used, a very reductive way to just embody like this idea of one type of state clearly works because if you start it in a vacuum, it's going to play out this way, and one of them doesn't, etc. And I also think there's not enough, probably not enough being written about it, not enough ink being spilled, and that stuff that is being made is insufficient. So, like recently,
yeah, I think I would actually disagree with you. I'd say that it's being written about entirely too much by people who have no fucking clue what they're talking about.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like. For example, like a lot of the time that I read this stuff in the Times and the Post and the Miami Herald is another big paper that covers this a lot because there's a sizable Venezuelan population in Miami in southern Florida. But all of these places sort of take the side of some of these institutions like, Policy International and sort of these think tanks that supposedly tell the truth about everywhere in an equal way. But really don't.
Yeah, my biggest gripe is probably with the Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, being that he occupies the space that we sort of do as a comedy like politics show.
Also on HBO.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just like us. Hello, I'm John Oliver, and welcome to the damned...
Hot Damn America, popular HBO program.
Yeah. But John Oliver did an episode about Venezuela and sort of came to some pretty, lame conclusions.
It was the same thing that people trot out every time. It was sort of disappointing to see it, actually, because he's so good on other things.
Yeah, he often is. He's also, but I'll give you this, one sort of couple degrees of separation. We are a couple degrees of separation from him now via that show, because there's a clip on the show where he
oh, really?
He shows these two people fighting in public, and it's like some guy, some MAGA hat chud guy going like Venezuela, whatever, and then there's this like hipster woman standing there wearing like this Sailor Moon ass outfit.
Oh yeah.
And she goes like, "We just want like fucking healthcare or something,
we just
right?"
Want healthcare.
Dasha, right? That was Dasha. Yeah, that was Adam Friedland's girlfriend, who's the host of Red Scare. Dasha. A lot of people don't know this. Her name is short for Duh Share Zone. All right, I just want to get that joke in there. But anyway,
gotta fulfill the sort of episodical Cumtown reference every time.
Not enough Cumtown references on Last Week Tonight, I will say.
That would be cool, though. That would be really cool.
Dan Ninen.
Dan Ninen.
Look at me.
He does a half hour. He does a half hour on Dan Ninen.
Yeah. That'd be great.
I'm actually here to say that the Venezuelan economy collapsed because somebody charged a Samsung.
There you go. Anyways.
Dan Ninen would do a show in Venezuela, like for Maduro. And,
absolutely.
Yeah. No question.
Whichever side you
one would understand him. Everybody would be confused. But because Maduro is laughing because he's on some sort of drug or something, everybody else has to laugh as well. So sort of a chance of somehow becoming like the most popular comedian internationally and making way more money than any of you can.
Yeah.
God, everything's so depressing.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Adam, you're a bug, Adam. All right, that wasn't even a good John Oliver. I'm losing my British accent. Anyways, Adalberto, thank you for joining us, and please explain Venezuela to us.
So it's sort of a very interesting situation because, and there's been a few articles written about it that I actually enjoy reading, as opposed to the normal nonsense. But it really is a complicated issue, and you have to understand very different aspects of Venezuela and Venezuela's history and its economy to really get down to why things are the way that they are right now. So when you look at the way that the functioning economy of Venezuela has worked for the past 50, 40 years, it's been very tied to the oil economy. And Venezuela has this very specific type of crude oil that's very difficult to refine, so you have to have very specific infrastructure for that you have to constantly upkeep and everything, which will become relevant later on. But when you look at the way that oil prices and the revenue of the Venezuelan government, you look at the fact that it's, for example, in 1993, I believe it was at 67%, and then it's risen now to 95%. So all the money that the Venezuelan government is getting is from the oil sector, which, not a thriving sector, the oil sector. So it's a problem that it's faced forever, and it's subject to the boom and bust cycles of the economy, as well as the cartel that is OPEC and their price setting measures, as well as the fact that production, have to keep up with the production, as well as the fact that countries like the United States, which was the largest exporter or importer of Venezuelan oil, actually has rolled back over the years. It's the amount of oil that they import, because we've become more energy independent in this country in a lot of really crazy ways, like fracking, etc. But to go off of this oil and oil industry and everything, the national oil company is PDVSA, and my dad actually worked for PDVSA. He was a manager there, and in 2002, after Chavez came to power, he actually was one of 20,000 people that was fired by the Hugo Chavez because of their opposition to the government and the fact that they led I think it was 6-month-long general strike they call it a bosses strike, because it was primarily sort of managerial class and executives that participated in this, and because they weren't there to guide a lot of the workers and et cetera, they, the economy sort of faltered in that way. So it's a lot of sort of self-fulfilling prophecies in terms of, because of this large general strike that happened, production went down, and things were affected in that, to that extent, so that the right could then point to something and say, well, look at the way that the oil company has gone, because of your government not realizing that they were impacting that as well.
Just to jump in and clarify, what were the demands for the strike?
So the demands were basically to completely, they were pretty outrageous, honestly, because from the very onset, this was right after the attempted coup on Chavez in 2002. So this was really an effort of the right and the managerial class of the largest company in the country to basically say, we don't want this government, we want it to be taken down, we want elections now, and we want to reestablish the sort of neoliberal government that we had before. So it really was that bold-faced, that sort of, we need to overthrow the regime, we've already tried to do it violently, and we're not going to work with you. That's essentially what they were saying.
So the conflict was essentially a private company being nationalized and it going to be under the auspices of the state.
So it was it was already a state-owned company, but it was so influenced by foreign investment and so sort of in a system that worked alongside other private industry in the country that it essentially was in private hands when you really look at it. And a lot of the people higher ups and everybody were, of course, neoliberals who had been there forever and that kind of thing. So, I really point to this as being the very beginning of this this fight that there has been between the right and the left in Venezuela more recently. But it's nothing that's not unique. It's nothing that's unique in Latin America. We've seen leftist governments being overthrown by the United States a lot of times. The most recent news in Venezuela is that that the Trump administration has been talking about invading the country, and it was,
right.
as far as I understand, Trump was the one who said that he didn't want to do it.
The way I kind of heard that story was that they had sort of tried to float the same deal to the Obama administration, were rebuffed, and then when Trump came out and sort of started speaking loudly and boisterously about Venezuela, they thought, oh, this guy might be down for it, and they tried him.
Which is so terrifying.
Yeah. Because it's very clearly could have happened,
right.
pretty easily.
And I honestly wouldn't put it past them even now. I mean, this is a thing that now that it's on the table, I mean, now we know that it really is out there, and that they really are floating out these ideas. And it's nothing that's weird. I mean, like I said, I mean, September 11th was yesterday, right? I mean, that was when Allende was overthrown in Chile.
Yeah, it's the anniversary.
The other 9/11, guys. Not the one that the Jews did.
The one we did forget about.
Yeah.
Right, the one that we all forgot about. Yeah. But anyway, I mean, this sort of right vitriolic hatred of the left. I think when Matt Chrisman came on the show last time, he talked about this sort of very intense fight between the left and the right, and how the right really does see it as an existential crisis for itself, and that it has to weed it out in any way that it can. And at this point, the right is functioning in that way in Venezuela. I mean, when you look at the protests in 2014, and when you look at protests in the past of that, they were all headed by right-wing leaders. They were all, funded by neoliberals and the sort of class that ruled the country before the Chavez's sort of popular revolution. I mean, it really is this what we're seeing in Venezuela today is the right really not wanting to work, not wanting to do anything that will aid the Maduro government or the Chavez government.
Yeah, and the aesthetic of it is so easy to see, just a thumbnail of, if you're in the United States, and just kind of glom onto this idea of the resistance. You mentioned 2014. I remember seeing Jared Leto accepting an Oscar for his performance with Dallas Buyers Club, and he's like,
God.
I stand
I
with not only trans women but oppressed people around the world, like in Venezuela. I stand here for you. Like,
jeez.
Yeah. Why did we listen to celebrities about this shit at all?
Yeah. Okay, well, let me do like a sort of apology of Venezuela real quick, if I could.
Sure.
So, or of the left politics in Venezuela. So, in 1999, when Chavez was elected, it was a very intense moment in the country because I think extreme poverty was at 20%, the highest it ever been in the country. Unemployment was around 17%, unemployment was at 17%. Extreme poverty was at 17%. Pensions were horrible. They were having a horrible pension crisis because of neoliberal reforms that took money away from pensions in the public sector, and people were tired of this neoliberal government that was always about private business and private investment, but always left out the lower classes. There was always there's this thing that people say in Caracas. I'm actually from Maracaibo, which is the sort of the Boston to New York, that kind of thing. Like, Caracas is New York, and we hate them just because that's how it is. But apparently people say in Caracas that in the maps of the city, the sort of favela-like barrios that existed in the hills weren't included in the map. So leftists sort of saw that as like a sort of bold-faced example of how ostracized they were and how left behind by the government they were. So what they did was they elected a popular leftist figure who they knew was against neoliberal government because he already tried to overthrow a neoliberal government in the past. He did it in the Caracazo in the 90s. And what he ran on was, we need to change the Constitution so that it doesn't serve private interests, so it doesn't serve the the powers that be right now, so it doesn't serve the families that have so much capital and so much land in this country, and so that it can serve everybody else. And they wanted housing reform. They wanted to decommodify housing. They wanted to expand healthcare, get rid of an illiteracy problem that had the illiteracy rate in 1999 when he took power was 17%. It's 1% now. It doesn't exist. And what he did for a really long time, from about 1999 to 2014 when Maduro came to power, was grow the economy. Poverty fell from 43% when he took power to 26% in 2014. Pensions were under $400,000 overall of all public workers, and it went to 2.1 million. Malnutrition fell from 21% to 2%. I mean, you can tell that, these are real things that are affecting not the middle class and not the people the elite, but these are things that are going to the poor, the poorest of the poor.
Right.
And that's what I think that the right sort of doesn't. That's where the hatred comes from in terms of the right in Venezuela and the expat community here, is that they see it as, the government is handing out all these things to these people, and we sort of have to fend for ourselves, and we have to have a country that is the way that it is. When really it was a popular revolution that wanted to actually change a course of history that so far had enslaved Venezuela to private interests and imperialist interests for their oil. That's what it was throughout the 20th century, throughout the 19th century, and they wanted to change that.
Also worth pointing out, as you mentioned, he was elected, Chavez, and
exactly.
that kind of contradicts a designation he's received in U.S. media, including, I believe, last week tonight, that he is a dictator. Why does that why is that so pervasive, that Maduro too, that they're dictators when they're clearly been democratically elected?
Right. Not only are they elected, like, it's within their own constitution that they can be recalled.
Yeah.
Right. So that's actually a good point. I was going to say that is that when Chavez was elected in 2002, there was a recall election. And it was, I mean, the left, obviously, and the Socialist Party didn't like that because they were testing the sort of power of a person who had gone to power politically or popularly. But, the opposition mustered up the 20% necessary that says in the Constitution to do this. And they got the recall election, and it failed massively, I think by a larger margin than it did in 1999, if I remember correctly. And, this is a democratic system that when everybody came to the table in 1999 to make a new constitution, everybody's voices were heard, and it just so happened that the leftist voices were more. And that's the sort of that goes back to that existential crisis of the right, is that they felt that they were being left out. And I was actually just having a conversation with my cousin this weekend, and he was talking about how they all they wanted to do was steal. All they wanted to do was enrich themselves. All they wanted to do was do all these things. And it's like, no, I mean, they really did have a progressive message of wanting to uplift people from their poverty and to make the country better. And they fell into the corruption that other countries do, other leaders do, because they're people. In parentheses, because they're tankies, in my opinion. It's a sort of thing of if you really hate something so much, like the right did in wanting to recall the election and supporting the coup, and then leaving the country, it sort of is that self-fulfilling prophecy of, well, capital left because you left. All these companies are wanting to get out of the Venezuelan market because they're scared. So then you have shortages of food and basic goods because they're not being produced in Venezuela anymore, because private interests have moved their companies to other countries, and now they have to deal with, international trade. It is sort of a snowball effect of a lot of different factors, and it really isn't just, Maduro is a horrible president and socialism doesn't work.
Right, yeah. It seems to be a lot more nuanced than that.
Yeah. I do something that I haven't quite gotten a clear answer to is it seems like a big problem with the Venezuelan economy, and this goes back to Chavez and continues today, is that it's oil-centric, as you mentioned.
Right.
Why did Chavez not take more steps to diversify the economy?
So that was part of his plan when he ran in 1999, and it was something that had been talked about, even in the 50s, whenever Venezuela saw its largest sort of public investment and infrastructure and the sort of New Deal kind of thing for them. And I haven't really found a clear answer to that in everything that I've read. But some people attribute it to maybe that corruption started very early on, and they sort of very quickly fell away from wanting to put all of these or diversify the economy and more so toward keeping their power. That's, I think, what the right would say. But I think that I would say that, in my opinion, when you look at the way that the economics of Venezuela functions, it's not prone to a lot of sort of private investment in terms of, for example, like 15% of the country is national rainforests, and most of that has resources on it. It has like a lot of gold and a lot of ores and a lot of oil, but whereas everybody has sort of thought about it and said, this is a beautiful landscape that do we really want to ruin it? So it's a matter of, yes, we could bring all these sort of exploitative, extractive companies, and Maduro has been doing that recently, but do we want to do it at the expense of our natural habitats and our country itself?
Yeah, you're really damned if you do, damned if you don't with that whole situation.
Yeah, exactly. Because the Venezuelan economy is so centered on exports, you do want to sort of focus on ore and extractive concerns, and to sort of drive up other private industry like financing, etc. But you can't have that if you don't agree to do it, and it's a matter of whether you should do it, right?
Yeah. I mean, it would have been difficult to develop exports in sort of a socialistic way, the way he was kind of able to do with oil, since it had already been publicly owned.
Right.
Chavez, of course, was a socialist, and it seems like his brand of socialism was very big on internationalism, and
right.
I believe he worked in cooperation with some other Latin American states and was able to, I think, loan Argentina money so they could pay off their IMF loans and stuff.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So
that was in cooperation with a couple other countries as well.
Right.
Yeah. That
was pretty awesome. And it seemed like for a while Latin America was headed towards the great, land of Marx. But what happened? How did that? Because now it seems like the right is on the rise. I mean, everywhere, but especially in Latin America. How did that things crumble so quickly?
So I really do attribute it to first the economic pressures that any socialist government, any sort of progressive government has when they're dealing with a hegemonic capitalist system. But of course, there's always the fact that these are countries that have always been very underdeveloped, very rife with imperialist, I guess, international intervention. I mean, Venezuela really could be called a democracy only in 1958, and then again maybe in the 70s, when they actually had sort of credible real elections. But even then, I mean, and whenever Chavez was elected, I think it was 89% of Venezuelans believed elections were rigged. So, I mean, it really is sort of, you have to look at the history of Latin America, all the coups that were sponsored by the United States, all those sort of rightist leaders that came to power, and the economic pressures that they faced because of geography, because of underdevelopment, and because of the pressures of the American market, which, for example, like one of the things that I really loved about a class that I took in college was that we talked about the economic system that Brazil, Argentina, and a lot of other countries in Latin America tried to employ, which is basically creating a home market for everything from cars to microwaves, so that you have your own market for those things and that you don't have to rely on imports for that, and thus pin your economy to any specific thing.
That's kind of what AMLO is trying to do in Mexico.
Right, exactly. And ultimately it failed because a Brazilian car isn't better than Ford. And
put her in H.
A microwave. Yeah.
From The Simpsons.
Oh, man. Yeah, I mean, Brazil does have, like, Embraer is Brazilian, and that they make a bunch of planes and stuff, so that's cool. But for the most part, these industries failed because they were competing in a market that allowed sort of all these things to disrupt markets everywhere, and didn't do it in a way that was that thought about the way that it could impact other countries. Like Japan made cars very cheaply, and that's why it destroyed our car sector. And that's what happened in Brazil and Venezuela and Argentina with Ford and GMC and everybody else. It's just sort of it is a thing of when you have this hegemonic power of capitalism right there, you really can't do much.
Yeah, I think that's what's interesting about the arguments being made about Venezuela and other Latin American countries, because none of these things exist in vacuums, and so to blame certain aspects of the the government within itself, it's like, well, you always have to factor in that these are connected to America and
exactly
the global market and at large.
Yeah,
and it's pretty bold-faced in its connection. I mean, they've tried to overthrow governments throughout history, and they continue to do so, or to try to do that. I mean, there's rumors, there's a conspiracy theory that they might have killed Chavez by injecting him with something that gave him cancer. One of the stories that I heard from, I don't know if that's true. It's not like that far of a reach.
He ate a cinnamon raisin bagel with lox.
Yeah, they gave him the heavy load bagel or whatever the fuck Cynthia Nixon.
That's so. Yeah, that's. Come on, Cynthia. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. We can.
Sorry.
What is good ass Venezuelan food I'm trying to think of right now?
Arepas pequeños.
You said arepas, right?
Yeah, arepas is like my thing. Pequeños are another thing, and they're like cheese sticks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They gave him
all great.
A poison arepa. They filled the cheese with.
Yeah, they gave him poison arepa with some cancer on it, and then he ate it, and it gave him cancer in his hip, and he died.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's another actually conspiracy theory. This is actually pretty funny. There's an idea that Chavez always had this obsession with Simon Bolivar, which is our George Washington, right? He sort of is the liberator of Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, a bunch of countries. And he's this sort of really intense figure in Latin American history. And he was buried in Caracas. And what he did was he was trying to do a project where for the, I think it was 200th birthday of the country, he would, which was in 2011, he would exhume his body and make a... okay, you remember that picture that the History Channel made of Jesus and how Jesus looked really weird and everything?
Oh, yeah.
Remember that?
That's supposed to be what he actually looked like or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, this is what he actually looked like. Surprise, he's not white.
Yeah.
But they did the same thing with Simon Bolivar, and he looks really strange. And his picture, that sort of rendering, that 3D rendering that they made, is everywhere in the country. But basically, they exhumed his bones to do this so that they could look at his face and his facial structure and everything. And apparently there's a theory, or a conspiracy theory, that when they did this, Chavez wanted to do some Santeria on it.
Hell yeah.
And,
I do practice Santeria.
Yeah, he do practice Santeria. He apparently
had a lot of oil shares. Sorry.
Nice. And the worst guitar solo ever plays.
Yeah.
But sorry, what did he do?
So he had a lot of rumors around him that he practiced that kind of stuff, and that he was into these cults and in the Amazons and all this stuff, which is just cool.
Yeah,
That's just like, this is another example of him connecting so well with the Venezuelan people because they're all like that.
Yeah.
They're all like santeros, and they're all like incredibly into magia, un mago, una maga. Yeah, it's intense. But he exhumed his body and took a bone from his hip and crushed it up and smoked it, apparently, or ate it, or consumed it in some way to, get the liberators' power. I mean, this is, the man who liberated Latin America. You want to, you gotta eat his bones. Why not?
To become truly one with Relor, the Lord of Light, you must eat Simon Bolivar's bones, his hip bones.
Exactly. Yeah.
Only then will you slay the boy king and take your place as the emperor of the fucking Western Hemisphere. I've been reading a lot of Game of Thrones. Sorry.
Yeah, I feel you. So there's a thing that says that he died from hip cancer, first of all, and they're saying, "Oh my God, he ate a bone from his hip, and he was cursed, and then he died from hip cancer."
Oh my God, that rules.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah, that's totally it.
Holy shit!
Wow. And I don't not believe that the United States somehow has anything to do with like Santeria in Venezuela and are also infiltrated in there.
Oh,
like that.
I mean,
if we're doing some men who stare at goat shit, we've definitely dipped into the dark arts. We've given it a shot.
I mean, like, didn't we put like a bunch of people in the Black Panther movement, and then it was literally all CIA people at that point by the end.
A room full of people that were all actually agent provocateurs. Yeah, dude, that shit's so funny. I read this book about the FBI, and it was cracking me up because there's this chapter about how like a bunch of agent provocateurs just never came back to the FBI because they were having too good of a time hanging out with like the Black Panthers and shit. Just deserted their job.
That's so funny.
Yeah. I do want to ask about today with the situation with Maduro. I mean, we discussed how the resistance, so-called, is really just a pretty anti-democratic force that's bought and sold by by the bourgeoisie, and also backed by the U.S. But there's are certain socialists who are taking the exact opposite tack, that Maduro is an unfairly maligned figure. Any criticism of him is pure U.S. propaganda, and we have to support his regime. Why is that also not really a very good way of understanding the situation?
Oh, yeah. All those people have, like, Joseph Stalin as their Twitter ad and shit.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, all those people really, really like Lenin and will defend him to the end. Which, like, I will too sometimes, but...
Did you hear that he jacked off with Paul McCartney, though?
That's pretty cool. I didn't know that.
It's a story that came out this week. I mean, the story obviously is John Lennon and Paul McCartney apparently like jacked off together at some point during the Beatles, and everyone's making jokes about it.
They did it with Vladimir Lenin's a bone from his hip. Actually,
they were fucking his corpse as Elvis.
And that's why they died. And that's why both of them are dead now.
Especially Paul McCartney. Yeah.
Right, who are both dead.
The real Paul McCartney, let's be honest.
Yeah, exactly.
He was swapped. He was an FBI plant.
It's all part
of an FBI plant.
It's all connected.
It's not bullshit. Read my blog.
The real Paul McCartney died doing brujeria somewhere in the jungle in Venezuela.
Yeah, exactly.
Trying to summon a demon to kill Chavez.
Doing peyote and ayahuasca and finding himself. No, okay, so to answer your question, I mean, I think that's just not really understanding the situation. I mean, he really is. When you look at the Constituent Assembly election that happened in July of this year, which he called because the National Assembly, which was controlled by the opposition and currently still is, tried to do this sort of constitutional maneuvering by electing their own Supreme Court. So there was there were two Supreme Courts. And there were, there was the official Supreme Court and then, like, the shadow Supreme Court that was doing other shit. Yeah, like the shadow, cool, damned Supreme Court.
Cloaks and shit, I like it.
No, they're not cool, though. Basically, Maduro saw that and said, okay, I probably don't like that, having this sort of political control on this level. But what he did was really solidify his power in July. And what does that say? That says that he really is the dictator that everybody says he is, and that it wasn't a democratic system. Because although there were a lot of people who boycotted it from the right, I mean, they sort of gerrymandered it to where it really was all PSUV members and or socialist members in that constituent assembly. So at this point, you really do see that it really is all just corruption. And I mean, I saw this in the Miami Herald. This hyperinflation issue is fueling private people with a lot of capital to manipulate currency exchanges to where they get a bunch of money. You could basically turn $1,000 into $14,000 if you exchange it correctly.
I read that.
Cards right.
That cool grift you could do, where you take $1 and you buy a cheeseburger and then you sell it in another country and flip it a bunch of times. Which, by the way, is a thing that a lot of people did in the government. From the 60s to now. But the socialists really did it in a very special way. Like the Chavistas really did it in a man, you're really not hiding that you're corrupt. This is just pretty intense, kind of corruption that you got going on here. And they've been tried to drug cartels and all this stuff, and they are pretty credible things to believe. And their ties to Cuba, which is tanky nonsense also. That's where Maduro and Chavez are irredeemable to me, is because they really do want to just have all the political power and not have a democratic system that even they talked about at first. Yeah.
So what do you say then to somebody who's a radical living in Venezuela? Do they try to find a better party or make a better party, or they just go fucking full on anarchist?
So this is the question that I was fearing from this, because it's one of these things where you really don't know, and you probably shouldn't speculate. I mean, that's a thing that you should do always, but maybe that's just the journalist in me. But I think at this point what you can do is really just try to overthrow the government and put your own thing in there. But because the sort of democratic systems that are in place can't do that anymore, because it's so either the opposition or the now I guess the Maduro's party, right? So it is a battle between these two interests, and where it is this sort of thing of that you see in this country of Democrats hating on Bernie people because, oh, why weren't you with us? We all want the same things, don't we? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's no, we don't all want the same things. A lot of these leaders that could be made, that could be put up by the opposition, like Leopoldo Lopez and Capriles and all these people, they all come from, hacendado families in Venezuela who have been there forever, and in the history of the country. You can see them all the way back to the 1800s. They have all this accumulated capital that they've used for political campaigns, for self-interest, that kind of stuff. And what are they going to do? They're going to do what they're doing in Argentina, which doesn't work. I mean, as we know, with Macri and his neoliberal reforms, we're going to have... I mean, Leopoldo Lopez, to me, is a lot like Peña Nieto in Mexico, the guy who recently got taken out.
All right.
He was so unpopular. And I really think that Leopoldo Lopez would be popular for a while, but because he's just another Emmanuel Macron or Justin Trudeau, he's just gonna drive the country into chaos again, like Caldera did before him in the 90s, and like Perez Jimenez did, and all these presidents of Venezuela that tried to do good but ended up not being able to.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting looking at Latin America, because I feel like and I am going to make some huge generalizations and speculations here, but I feel like the U.S., we're like a few steps behind Latin America in that we're still figuring out the parliamentary thing, and it's like you can achieve things through that, but we're coming up on, after we try to do that, we're going to see how that actually can kind of crumble too, and we're going to have to pick up the pieces at some point.
Right.
So, I mean, I am kind of sympathetic to the argument that, like, yeah, if you're in Latin America, like, the parliamentary system only got you so far. Like, you need another form of politics.
Right, exactly. And, you bring up a really good point, because one of the things that was really instilled in me from birth is political action and being politically active. Because Venezuelans are so politically active. I mean, that 2002 strike, it was a rightist strike, and it was sort of based on private interests and wanting to, on neoliberal interests or liberal interests. But it was, they did it because they had a history of protesting, of fighting governments, of overthrowing governments, of doing all of these things and changing things radically. Whereas in the United States, you don't have that. I mean, the Venezuelan Constitution has been changed 26 times in the history of the country, and we're only 200-something years old, 207 years old. So when you really look at it when you don't have a stable constitution, you can only do so much. And the most stable one in 1968 was the one that got Venezuela to the place where it was in the 90s, with large poverty, huge inequality, and wealth inequality, wealth disparity in general. And they thought that they, in 1999, that they could change that and make it better. And that's the thing that people forget all the time, is that everybody came to the table. Everybody agreed to having a new constitution in that way. And what the right wants to do in Venezuela now is to have, my cousin this weekend was like, I'd be okay with the United States invading a country and doing all the things that they do, and doing the famously restrained and really thought out things that they do when they invade a country. It really is this thing of, I don't want international intervention in Venezuela, but has it gotten worse enough to where people want to rise up against the government and really come together? And I don't think that can't be answered yet. I think that the animosity between the two groups is really big, and the people in the middle I guess not in the middle, but the people in the fringes don't really want what they want. So,
to that point about what people want, something I think is kind of interesting that you might be able to help us understand a little bit better is what people actually want in Venezuela, because I bring that up because all of our propaganda, all the shit that comes out of these think tanks up here sort of would have us believe that there's sort of this cut and dry reaction. Oh, everyone hates Maduro and all this stuff, and then you've got people like Abby Martin going down there and going like, nah, it's completely the opposite. They love him, and,
yeah.
And to me, when I was reading like the Jackman piece you sent me and just sort of brushing up on it a little bit more, like it seemed a little bit more nuanced. Like there's kind of a split.
There's a lot of people who... Yeah, go ahead.
Just in people's like ideal solution to this problem, because there are people, I guess the main thing that seems interesting to me is that people are sort of losing their faith in Chavista. And they may be kind of throwing out the baby with the bathwater in this whole situation. Right. Can you expound upon that?
So I think that when you look at the way that people talk about the situation in Venezuela, they are really frustrated with the situation, and not so much with the government in terms of the left. So Maduro is still very popular in terms of he could be much less popular, I guess you could say, as things are right now. Mm-hmm. And somehow he still has retained that popularity. And it is because, there are a lot of people that still believe in the movement. And so they don't know how to separate the movement from the people who ran it. who were corrupt, who did not have them in their best interest a lot of the time. And then there's the people who are saying that, like my cousin, who I don't think is a very big minority, honestly, that really do want international intervention in Venezuela, that do want, boots on the ground and want to have, a violent sort of taken down of the government. And it's not something new. I mean, they tried to do it in 2002. All the protests in Venezuela in 2014 and more recently have been very violent because of the right. Maybe the left was to blame for some of them, but the right was to blame for a lot of them as well. So it is this sort of thing of nobody really knows what the next step is, and the fact that the Constituent Assembly that was elected this year didn't panned out to just be Maduro trying to uphold his power, I think it really defeated a lot of people's hopes in the system. So, Anders, you bring up a good point of, our people, this history of Latin America being very radical and wanting to change its governments and everything. It's like you really have these two opposing forces that say, well, the revolution already happened, let's work with this. And the people who are saying we want to have a counter-revolution, we want to return Venezuela to neoliberal heaven or whatever that is.
Cool. I'm not cool, but
yeah.
No, that sounds actually
cool analysis.
Quite dire.
Yeah.
Right on. Also, before we wrap up, I don't know. I guess any final thoughts on? I guess I'm trying to figure out what the point of talking about this is. Because it's obviously I don't know. It's not like any of us are gonna have really great predictions on what the future of this holds. But how does this help the discourse? Here in the States, I guess.
Well, I think that if you're a Venezuelan youth and you're listening, question your parents, because if you're in this country, you probably do have very right-wing parents.
That was something I wanted to bring up earlier when you were talking about expats, because I see this all the time, and as a person who is they're immigrants that I come from, I notice this all the time. There's this distortion that people get where they it's very easy to buy into the myth that well, look, all these people are fleeing these countries because they're so terrible, and you go, well, yeah, but that's kind of circular logic. You're talking to the people who left the countries. You're not talking to the whole census or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's the trap that the sort of American media falls into because of the the situation that you're talking about. The expat community here is very conservative, is very right wing. My dad voted for Trump, and a lot of people that my dad, hangs out with that I got to see throughout my entire life also voted for Trump and are very right-wing. And I don't think that's really exclusive to other Venezuelan communities in the country. I really do see it as very comparable to the way that the Cuban expat community is. Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz are the beautiful examples of what the Cuban community can bring to this. The expats here are really funny because they really are sort of where I'm from, specifically Maracaibo. It's in the state called Zulia, and Zulia is exactly like Texas. One of the main themes that I get from a lot of the expats in Houston, particularly, and because there's not that many of us, I know a lot of them through my parents and at parties and stuff like that, is that they are all very wealthy. They're all ex-oil people who have found the embracing arms of Shell and Exxon and BP and all these other Houston companies. They were the people that left and did the brain draining of the country that it's suffering from currently. And they were the ones who didn't want to work with the government, and they are in part to blame for what happened to it. I think that's the thing that a lot of a lot of Cuban expats always say. It's one of the socialist things that people say is, sorry, hang on. So people talk about how a lot of the Cubans who are here because they had a lot of land and were probably cops and horrible people in Cuba. And that's true of the Venezuelan people here as well. I guess I would say that like I was saying earlier, that if you're a Venezuelan, you probably should question what you've heard. And then if you're somebody that really likes to look at the full picture of things, you really can't get that from the Western media and from the media in this country, and that you have to really actually look at other people as well. And as far as how it will turn out in the future, I really hope that, at some point, maybe other Latin American countries, maybe, China can step in a way that it's been doing in other countries and sort of save the system. But at this point, Chavismo and socialism in Venezuela is being threatened. And I don't think that it's going to survive in the way that I guess we would like it to.
Yeah. Well, that's a sad tale.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I would like to think that somehow it might survive this, but it seems like people are getting really soured on it.
Inflation is this thing where, like, it really doesn't have that many fixes.
Yeah. And
the Venezuelan economy isn't really doing that well, so it's not looking good.
Okay, well, as a proposed solution to the problem, I think what we could probably do is, maybe like dig up John McCain's bones and sort of like do a brujeria ritual with them where we arrange them and like in like the formation of a pentagram around a little crashed toy airplane, and then light candles, and then and then smoke ayahuasca out of his skull or something.
The opposition dies in a plane crash, and then it's just Maduro and the even more radical left.
Right, exactly. And then we can have beautiful tanky government forever that will always work and never fail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, Adalberto. Do you want to plug
Thanks for having me.
Anywhere people can, reach you or read your stuff?
Nope.
All right.
Yeah. But yeah.
Cool.
I mean, I guess, subscribe to your local news, but also question them in every fucking way that you can, please.
Yeah.
And always bother them. But support my profession, I guess, until I decide to do something else, and then don't.
All right, the ambivalent journalist Adalberto Antonio Toledo. Cool. All right. Well, I think that's the show. So yeah, I'm gonna let you go. Thanks for calling in. Let's keep in touch.
Thanks, Jake. Yeah. Bye.
Bye. All right. Well, that's the episode for the week. That's a very depressing but more realistic look at I think the nuance of how shit's going down in Venezuela.
Yeah.
I think if you're really interested in this, read I'll link to the Jacobin article he sent us to sort of prime us on this. It sort of explained a little bit more about I think in a little bit more linear fashion about how the dream of socialism rose and then turned into whatever's happening down there right now with Maduro and shit. But yeah, so next time, a fat chud guy in a MAGA hat, goes like, what about Venezuela? You can
say, I got an hour-long podcast for you, buddy.
Boy, let me tell you. Yeah. And not only that, you can subscribe to their Patreon on patreon.com/PodDamnAmerica. Now accessible through the search bar.
What?
Yeah,
what happened?
I got it fixed.
Oh, cool.
We're just no longer listed as adult content. I thought that we should list it as adult content in case someone fucks with us, but then it turns out no one does that, and all it did was make us really hard to search.
Right. I mean, it does have damn in the name.
Yeah. What's the phrase? Like, better to ask forgiveness than permission. You know what I mean?
Wow.
I'm just gonna keep infringing on copyright laws, putting cool music on this show.
Yeah.
Using curse words and talking about, fucked up shit until they take us down.